It is October 27, 1962. Inside the Soviet submarine B-59, submerged in the Sargasso Sea, the air conditioning has failed. The temperature in the engine compartment approaches 150 degrees. Carbon dioxide levels are rising, and the crew is running out of drinking water. The vessel is running too deep to monitor radio traffic from Moscow. Above them, 14 United States Navy warships encircle their position, methodically dropping practice depth charges, explosives the size of hand grenades, trying to force the submarine to the surface. Deafened by the underwater explosions and cut off from the outside world, Captain Valentin Savitsky reaches a breaking point. Exhausted, he assumes war has already broken out. He orders the crew to prepare their 15-kiloton nuclear-tipped torpedo for launch, declaring, "We're going to blast them now. We will die, but we will sink them all." Soviet naval protocol dictates that a special weapon can only be fired if 3 senior officers on board agree. The captain and the political officer give their consent. The launch sequence begins. The decision that would trigger a global nuclear exchange does not rest with the president in the Oval Office or the premier in the Kremlin. It rests entirely with 3 suffocating, sleep-deprived sailors hidden at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Less than a year earlier, following the American-sponsored invasion at the Bay of Pigs, Fidel Castro declared himself a Marxist-Leninist. Recognizing the vulnerability of his government, he asked the Soviet Union for weapons and troops. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev answered with a covert initiative codenamed Operation Anadyr. He ordered the secret deployment of medium-range ballistic missiles directly to the island, placing nuclear warheads 90 miles from the Florida coast. This technical reconnaissance photograph shows the Soviet launch facilities under construction in Cuba, captured by American U-2 spy planes in October 1962. The operation was compromised by a severe logistical oversight. The military planners in Moscow dispatched camouflage nets designed to conceal equipment in the dense coniferous forests of Russia. When draped over the hardware in the sparse Cuban palm groves, the vehicles and launch pads were completely exposed and highly visible from the air. Confronted with photographic proof, President John F. Kennedy went on national television on October 22nd. He announced a strict naval quarantine of Cuba and placed U.S. forces worldwide on Defense Condition 3. A simple error in supply chain management, shipping the wrong camouflage netting, uncovered a covert operation and locked the 2 superpowers into an active military standoff. In Washington, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council struggles to read Soviet intentions. Khrushchev sends a private letter offering to withdraw the Cuban missiles if the U.S. pledges not to invade the island. But hours later, a second, far more aggressive message is broadcast publicly. In this public broadcast, Khrushchev demands a trade. The Soviet Union will clear out of Cuba only if the United States removes its own intermediate-range Jupiter missiles stationed in Italy and Turkey. Kennedy faces a severe diplomatic dilemma. The Jupiters in Turkey are obsolete, but accepting the trade openly would suggest to the world that the United States is willing to bargain away the security of its NATO allies to protect its own borders. While the politicians deliberate over telegrams, the military apparatus executes its standing orders. The U.S. Navy is actively enforcing the quarantine, tailing Soviet freighters and hunting submarines in the Atlantic. The rigid political requirements in Washington and Moscow create a total diplomatic deadlock. The power to dictate what happens next shifts entirely into the hands of the military operators deployed out in the field. October 27 becomes known as Black Saturday. The military machines of both nations begin to operate on their own inertia, generating a series of uncommanded escalations. Over Cuba, an American U-2 spy plane is shot out of the sky by a Soviet surface-to-air missile, killing Major Rudy Anderson. Simultaneously, another American U-2 pilot loses his bearings near the North Pole. Blinded by the aurora borealis and a compass malfunction, he drifts deep into Soviet airspace over Siberia, scrambling Russian fighter jets and risking a severe anti-aircraft response. And deep in the Sargasso Sea, the crew of the B-59 is still taking explosives from American destroyers. Oxygen depletion leaves the sailors severely disoriented. As Captain Savitsky demands the launch of the nuclear torpedo, Flotilla Commander Vasily Arkhipov intervenes. As the third required officer, Arkhipov refuses to give his consent. He calms the captain down, overriding the launch order and forcing the submarine to the surface to breathe. That same evening, above the surface, Attorney General Robert Kennedy holds a clandestine meeting with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. They draft an informal, highly sensitive agreement to break the deadlock. The political leadership secures a compromise only because an isolated naval officer mutinied against his captain's orders, buying them the final few hours they needed. On October 28th, Khrushchev broadcast a message across Radio Moscow, announcing that Soviet military installations in Cuba will be dismantled and returned to the USSR. Fidel Castro learns of the withdrawal through a friend who edits a local newspaper. The realization that the Soviets negotiated away the missiles without consulting his government leaves him furious, confirming that Cuba was treated as a disposable pawn in a superpower negotiation. The United States honored its end of the bargain by dismantling the Jupiter missiles in Turkey and Italy over the following months. To protect American standing within NATO, this concession was kept by only 9 men in the Kennedy administration, the secret held for decades. The diplomatic victory that diffused a nuclear war was secured by keeping the terms hidden from the very allies both sides claimed to be defending. The events of Black Saturday laid bare how easily minor logistical errors, navigational malfunctions, and communication delays could trigger a nuclear holocaust. Acknowledging that slow diplomatic telegrams had nearly cost millions of lives, the two nations established a direct communications link, the Moscow-Washington hotline, so leaders could speak to each other immediately during a crisis. The following year, the shared terror of October 1962 resulted in the signing of the Limited Test Ban Treaty, halting all atmospheric, underwater, and space testing of nuclear weapons. The Cuban Missile Crisis was formally settled by heads of state making impossible concessions behind closed doors. But human civilization ultimately owes its existence to the exhausted restraint of a single naval officer, holding his nerve in the dark.